All right, so you probably just heard a few minutes ago the President of the United States is standing by Roy Moore. But did you catch that other development? Not so a record $85 billion media deal involving AT&T and Time Warner. That raised some eyebrows and all of a sudden some hackles at the corner of Wall and Broad. To Kevin Corke at the White House with more. Hey, Kevin, what's going on
Hey,
here?
my friend, you're right. Listen, this is a major opportunity for the administration to really set forward its policy on these major conglomerations, right? What does it feel about the major mergers that we have seen so many happen, Neil, you and I have talked about over the last several years? We're talking about $109 billion here if AT&T was able to consummate this deal, but the administration says, listen, this will not only limit cooperation and competition, it'll frankly limit innovation. Just before taking off for his vacation in Florida, the president making it clear that he doesn't want to get involved in a circumstance where he is commenting on ongoing litigation. But the facts are these. This is something that the administration has been very clear. It doesn't like this idea. And so when the president does finally weigh in, we suspect when he has the opportunity to say so, he will also say quite forcefully that the idea of an AT&T-Time Warner merger is not something that is in the interest not just of the average American who's got a cable bill, but not in the interest of American business. By the way, I want to run one thing by you, my friend. There are some people, Neil, who will make the argument that the president's antipathy towards CNN, which is in the Time Warner family, is behind the DOJ's decision here. White House sources have told me, on background, of course, that's simply not the case here. So when you hear that, understand from their perspective that it has nothing to do with it. That's their story, and they're sticking to it, Neil.
If you think about it, let's give them the benefit of the doubt on that. They could argue that even if they were to rail against this merger and the fact that CNN would be a part of it, it's not as if CNN, even jettison, wouldn't find many of interested bidders willing to pay top dollar. So there is something to what they say on, at least on that. You know?
No, I agree with you. And listen, they would probably piece them out of this deal ultimately. If it ultimately happens, it may not happen with AT&T, and I think you make a good point. I don't think there's any question. There are a number of potential suitors out there that would love to get their hands on in a major American media company with significant development and original programming. However, you're going to hear critics say that, Neil. You're going to hear them say this has something to do with his feud with CNN, but White House officials say that's just not true.
Yeah, because in the end, I mean, it's not that CNN would go away. If you don't
That's
like
right.
the network, it's not as if it would die on the vine if it were not part of this deal. Plenty of other vines out there clawing for it, as it were. All right, thank you, buddy, very, very much. All right, now the president, of course, weighing in on that AT&T Time Warner deal. Not really a big fan of it. Of course, this is not the first time we've seen either a White House or, by extension, a Justice Department. I know the two are not supposed to work in tandem on these kind of things, and the White House is disavowing that they are. But it, again, would not be the first time an administration of any sort has poo-pooed. In the last administration, a lot of healthcare mergers, insurance mergers, and in this one, a big media one. On the phone with us now, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Anna Napolitano. Let's say there was pressure applied on the Justice Department on the part of the White House, directly the president, to stop this. Surely, if you want to follow through on that, you're working under the idea that this would stop CNN, that this would kill off CNN. It wouldn't, right, Judge?
Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and an early happy Thanksgiving.
To you as well.
Remember, this is a lawsuit filed by the Justice Department. The Justice Department has to prove the case. If the defense is the president really hates CNN and that's the reason they want us to spin it off, the Justice Department loses, plain and simple, because that argument, if the court accepts it, would be such an interference with free speech in American society that the Justice Department would lose and the merger would go forward. Now, obviously, the Justice Department's going to argue, as it must under the law, that there are economic reasons to prevent the merger, almost all of which were so nicely just ticked off by our colleague Kevin Corke. But the essence of it is this. If you get to dominance in an industry, somewhere north of 40–45%. There's no hard and fast rule as to what the percentage is, but if you control north of 40–45% of an entire industry and you want to add to that, the Justice Department's going to look at it very, very carefully, because there is case law holding that once you get to that neighborhood, you can buy up your competitors and therefore stifle competition, and you can influence prices and therefore interfere with competition.
But it's a moving target, right? Especially when it comes to this type of technology, where you could conceivably say that Facebook at its market value dwarfs what's being talked about here, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And how do you measure the market? Is it the U.S. market? Is it the U.K. market? Is it the EU market? And when you're talking about something like CNN, what are you measuring? Are you measuring eyeballs on the screen, or are you measuring those precious eyeballs that we all look at on the screen, the buying public between age 24 and age 54? So this is virgin territory for the Justice Department to bring a lawsuit of this nature and say, in effect, we will go away if you sell this entity that has been a thorn in our boss's side for the past 18 months.
Then what happens? I mean, play this out, because AT&T is not the first company then to legally challenge that Justice Department challenge. And I'm reminded that sometimes administrations don't jibe up what you think would be the case with a Justice Department action. For example, it was under Reagan's Justice Department that, of course, we had the formal breakup of AT&T.
Right.
So you could make the case that that really is hardly a consistent case where the administration would personally push its point of view. I guess what I'm asking you here is, where do you think this goes? Now, with AT&T promising legal action of its own, this could be a mess.
I think the case will be settled in some way. That is, a federal judge will sit down with the Justice Department lawyers, with AT&T lawyers, with Time Warner lawyers, and say, let me suggest a couple of scenarios that maybe you all can live with. Because, Neil, the last thing you want is a jury trial. And the last thing you want in the jury trial is for the President of the United States to be called as a witness for the defense. Talk about selling tickets. The government really wants to avoid the specter that an economic and judicial decision was made for petty political purposes. I say specter. It may not even be true. The president may have not signaled this in any way. The Justice Department may have a negative opinion of the president's negative opinion of CNN. But the image and the impression is out there. And when it appears that justice is being motivated by politics, justice is going to correct itself.
Real quickly, Judge, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the Roy Moore thing, because the president seemed to stand by Roy Moore, that he's a better alternative than the Democratic candidate. Of course, this is at odds with Mitch McConnell, so they'll be at odds again on this. Now, I know if it's an uphill battle in the polls for Roy Moore to win this race, although let's say he does, you're dealing with some 40-year-old charges here, and I believe to censor or take any action in the Senate, it would have to be, I think, a tad more current. So what are we looking at here? Should he be elected?
Well, if he is elected, they have to seat him. They can't refuse to seat him because of these allegations. And once he's seated, if they move to expel him, Neil, no person has ever been expelled from the Congress, ever, for behavior that occurred, whether proven or not, before they were in the Congress. They can only get expelled for something that they do while they're there.
So that was the case with Bob Packwood, right, some years back, that occurred in his earlier days in Congress, right?
It is. Some of it occurred in his earlier days. Much of it occurred while he was there. But if he's there, and most of the Republicans won't talk to him, and won't shake hands with him, and won't let themselves have pictures taken with him, how happy a gang is this going to be? They might be better off with what the president is calling a liberal Democrat. Is not a liberal Democrat at all. He's a Ku Klux Klan busting former federal prosecutor who commanded respect across the political spectrum. They might very well be better off with somebody like that they can sit in a room and talk to than someone with whom they don't even want to make eye